So, piece of functionality within InDesign that's very, very powerful is, I'm going to say that a lot, very powerful, is multiple page sizes in a single document, which doesn't seem particularly radical, I grant you, but it seemed to be something that was added very, very late in the day. So why might that be beneficial? So, for example, if you're designing some stationery and you have got a letterhead, fine, a compliment slip, a business card, you can have 3 different file sizes. That's great, but that then means that it removes the potential for kind of human error between files, because all your resources and assets can come from the same source because you're using them within a single document. So somewhere where I use this a lot is when I'm designing assets for, like a social media campaign, for example. I can make sure that all the assets that I'm creating across Instagram, LinkedIn, or Facebook, depending on who it's for and where they're posting, I can kind of set up my template in pixels and make sure that all the source elements are the same. So again, because I'm making sure that it's all in a single document, I can then just export, like we did before with the print range. You can do the same thing, exporting them all out as JPEGs, for example. So, these kind of techniques are kind of transferable between different parts of the software. So stationery is one example. Social media assets is another. Here, for example, I've got 3 pages that make up the cover of a book. So the back cover, the spine, and the front cover. And, in terms of designing and setting this out, the reason that I would do it like this is because the spine width might change. I've spoken to the printer, they have got the paper that I want, I've asked for a dummy. So whenever I'll backtrack. So if you're ever designing a publication or a book and you are managing the print, then the best thing to do is always speak to your printer, obviously, and make sure that they are giving you the right information. So based on the number of pages, they will tell you what the spine width will be. In terms of getting a dummy, getting a print dummy, I'd always recommend getting 2 copies so that you can have a copy and you can send a copy to the client. You're not sending copies back and forth. The printer will do that as part of their service. That's fine. So get 2 copies, send one to the client. It will be using the correct paper stocks and the correct paper weights. Because you've got a physical dummy, you can double check the spine. And you can have a conversation about it rather than kind of not knowing about the quality. So a printer will always work with a paper merchant to create a dummy for you for free, or as part of the kind of service. But things might change. You might have a conversation about the binding, which has an impact on the spine. So then that might mean that the spine width has to change. So I might have to click onto the spine width and change it here, and then the pages will shrink down. I'll just show how you kind of create this from scratch. So in a moment, within your task, you're going to sort of set up a stationery suite. So this will kind of be the method. So new document, we're going to base it on A4 because obviously we've got a letterhead in there. I've turned off facing pages and I'm going to put 3 pages in there. So 1, 2, 3 in our page on the right hand side. If I go to page 2 and now click on that page, I can make it a custom size. There's presets here, but I'm going to make it my own custom size because I want it to be a compliment slip. So that's the second page done. And then if I come here and make a business card, kind of standard business card is a kind of corporate business card, 85 by 55. Fine, you've got 3 pages within a document, okay? So that's super, super quick and does all that kind of management of a single document rather than multiple documents. Another example of where you might use it, going back to our kind of hoarding example, rather than having it within a single page, you might want to produce multiple pages for a hoarding. So this still constitutes a spread. I've just got 4 pages next to each other. I'll show you how to do that in a minute because that sometimes throws people. Excuse me, stop that. So I've got a 6-meter hoarding, and the printer said, can you split it into 4 panels? So fine, 1.5 meters per panel. This is not to scale, but just sort of hypothetically. But by creating it as a spread with bleed, it means that when I export each of these pages with bleed, there'll be a slight overlap here because I'm exporting the bleed of this page, so it will creep into here, vice versa. So I'm giving the people installing it the tolerance to work with. But by splitting it as separate pages rather than a single page and not really knowing, I've always got control firstly over exporting it with bleed, which is kind of the time-saving element. But because I'm working with pages with hard edges, effectively, if I'm setting some type, the last thing I want to happen is that, basically. I want to be in a position where I can see exactly where everything falls. I don't want the eye in my design to fall there, because no matter how diligent I am in doing the artwork, when this gets printed, goes in the back of a van and it goes to an installer who, you know, it might be raining, you don't know what the circumstances are, he's maybe not paying quite as much attention to the detail, and just offsets those 2 panels, those 2 sheets, and suddenly we've lost a letter. So, you know, by making a spread like that and then working, it gives you that clearance, so you can make sure that your design kind of accounts for that human error. So that's always something to be very aware of. I'll jump into a new document very quickly just to show you how to create those spreads over multiple pages. So I'll do a facing pages document. So let's do a little brochure of, say, 6 pages. Great. So automatically, InDesign creates it like that. It offsets it because it gives us a front cover and a back cover. But we don't necessarily always want that. So we might start off the design of a book like that. But if this then becomes the end of the introduction, for example, and we want to start the next chapter on a spread, that second document, we don't want to have an offset page like that. So the thing to do is you've got 2 ticks here that you can turn off. One which is about pages, document pages to shuffle and spreads to shuffle. If you take that off, firstly it means that you can delete that first page, should you ever want to. In our scenario, we do. But if we now want to have more pages than a double page spread, we might want a wider spread. It might be a gatefold. So for example, it might be a brochure that has a cover with some flaps that fold in. That's a gatefold cover. Okay. So for example, let's sort of make that, we'll just make those 2 pages narrower because we don't want it to be the same page as the cover because you won't be able to open the gatefold. So if I do a width of 180, just again for sort of illustration purposes. And now you'll see we've got that there. But if you can drag it to drop it after, but if you drag it there, it'll attach it. So now I've got basically an 8-page gatefold, obviously, because I've got the inside as well. So I would, from an artworking point of view, if I've got print on the inside, I would obviously do that. That's front cover, inside, front, flap, back cover. So now, even though it's 4 pages, InDesign still classes that as a spread. So if you export it, make sure you've got spreads on, and it will do all 4. Okie dokie. So grids and guides, obviously we should be very familiar with that in terms of editorial design, general design, web design, using our grid to do a lot of the heavy lifting for us, making sure everything's aligned. So here I've just got a sort of 14-column grid with the margin set out. But we've also got the power of the baseline grid. And the baseline grid you access again through preferences. So Mac, it will be under File, but PC it's under Edit and Preferences. And then you have this thing here under Grids. And the baseline grid, which I've not turned on, which would have been helpful. Let me do that first. Oh, I have to put where's the baseline grid one? Hang on a minute. I always show baseline grid. What the hell? Oh, there you go, zoomed out too far. Oh, okay, all right, fine. It's got a sort of scale derived by the scale of the page. So I'm going to go into style sheets in a moment in depth, but semi-depth. But what you'll see here is that these text blocks, which are using the paragraph style body copy, because on that body copy style sheet, on indents and spacing, I've got a line to grid on, all lines. All the lines of the text always fall on, so everything running horizontal is bang on. I don't need to worry about it. But if I want to sort of shift the text and do something, play around with the layout, having a bit dynamic, but make sure there's a kind of underlying structure, I can just move things around here and it will always snap to the grid. That's dependent on my design, of course, and whether that's what I want. It's good practice to make sure the lines are always aligned. If I want to turn that off, obviously I can just say none, and then things are a little bit more freeform, but we all know what that looks like. It looks, not very pleasing to the eye. So we can be a bit pedantic and make sure everything hits the mark and hits the line. So I'll go into paragraph styles later, but that's what the baseline grid is for. The baseline grid is there to make sure you've got alignment across all pages. So if you, again, we're looking at an individual page here, but if we're scaling this idea up across a book of 300 pages, when you turn that page, everything always aligns across the pages. And you just think, oh, okay, this is really tidy. It's really, it's crisp, it kind of holds up, it's robust. And that's what it's there for. But it just, I know that if I've got the baseline grid on, put it back on, and I want to move things around, not very successfully, I know that that line is aligned with that, and I don't even have to, I can be zoomed right out if I want. It doesn't matter. So I'll just show you a few examples where that might be useful practically. So I've got a few guidelines documents here. Let me just scroll up a second. Start with the templates. So, having templates and baseline grids and all of that is great for you as a designer to make your life easier. But if you're then designing a series of templates for your client to use in-house, in this case, let me just make a note of what page that is. This is an identity of design for a management company called Urban Velvet, and they had lots of people in-house, big teams of people that were working with a communication suite that we designed. So we use InDesign and Word because different people did different things. If it was kind of marketing materials and everything was in InDesign, but we then also had to create templates for Word for the kind of admin staff, the kind of people managing the day-to-day. But there had to be a kind of continuity that ran across that and those skill sets. So once you have done the branding, you've done the logo, setting out a series of templates just to make sure that when the brand goes public and lots of people are using it, that it holds up and is robust. This is invariably one of the kind of key stages, is making sure all the templates do that. And then things like using the baseline grid are really, really important because it makes sure that people, as mentioned before, it makes sure that the computer's doing the computing. It's not reliant on somebody lining things up all the time. So particularly in kind of corporate work like this, it's very, very important, and it kind of comes down to real attention to detail. So this is the and a grid system. So it's a very basic grid system for this organization. I'll go into a slightly different one in a moment. And these are in Word, but the same principle applies basically. All the spacing and the grid is defined. And then every piece of communication that kind of goes out. So we've got minute meetings, we've got everything from reports, fact sheets, whatever. Everything kind of had to kind of feel part of the same family. And across a suite of documents, all of that had to be dealt with. So you can see here, which we'll go on to after the second exercise, we start looking at how style sheets get affected as part of the brand as well. Here's a drink. So another case study is, so this is a grid that we devised for Metropolitan Works, which is part of London Metropolitan University. And here we've done something a bit more asymmetric. So we've not kind of relied on having it just symmetric. And that then starts to inform how things are laid out. So on the right-hand side here, you know, we've got a slightly sort of dynamic layout. We've got examples of how that grid then works across little publications where they were selling particular services, and these are kind of case studies. And you know, that's all divided by the grid, and again, this baseline grid that kind of unifies everything. I'm going to put all the stuff I'm showing you today. It's going to be in the folder, so you can sort of dive into this stuff and sort of interrogate it and pull it apart. So all the references I'm using you'll have access to as well. Okay, so heading back to InDesign. So grids, yes, we know them well. You know, they are the underlying structure. I tend to kind of put another tier of structure. So here I've got this 14-column grid, but I've then subdivided the gutters. I just find it gives me a little bit more use, really. I can kind of make sure that the grid, I can either butt things up or go onto the column, depending on the use case. That will become more apparent in a later section where we're looking at the template that I started to devise for portfolios. So here, you know, we're just sort of playing around with the variation that a grid gives us. So that's kind of basic, we all know that. So what I would like to do for exercise 2, and this will be used then in exercise 3, is open up a new InDesign document. Like I showed you at the kind of beginning, if you can recall. I'm happy to go through it again. So open up a 3-page A4 document and then make it a multiple page size document. So there, I've just put the sizes for you. I've not put the business card size in, unhelpfully. Do that. So if you do that and then style up the text, so choose a font for your name and then maybe a secondary font for your body copy. So for your address, email, phone number, and social. So if you just create a letterhead, a comp slip, and a business card, and just give you sort of 10 minutes to do that. So just a quick exercise. And then we'll use it in the style sheet section.